for lots of buyers, if a seller shows up, whether it's in person or digitally, you have to deliver value from the very first interaction in order to get a second interaction or to proceed down the sales cycle. And so the days of like being able to do discovery calls and having all this time to like gather data, it doesn't exist anymore. That's what's driving this buyer first phenomenon. Buyers are doing the research. They know a lot. They know everything about your competitor because it's all public. They know all about your product because it's, for the most part, it's all public. They want to know how you add value. They want to know, like, increasingly, how is your company going to advise me, going to consult me, and add value to what I already know about the products.
I'm Devin Reed.
And I'm Sheena Badani.
And you're watching Reveal, the revenue intelligence podcast powered by Gong.
Keep watching here to see the full interview. Or if you like to listen to podcasts on the go, check out the links in the description below.
And if you like what you hear, subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, or all of them. Why not? And while you're there, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. We personally read every single one, and I think I speak for both of us when I say they mean the world to us.
Could not agree more, Devin. Now, without further ado, here's the episode you've been waiting for.
Jonathan, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Welcome to Reveal.
I am happy to be here, Devin and Sheena. Nice to see you both. Looking forward to the conversation.
Same here.
So you're the VP of Global Sales Solutions at LinkedIn. As just a really quick intro, can you tell us a bit about your role and what you're focused on this year?
Yeah, sure. So I manage one of LinkedIn's 3 commercial lines of business. I manage a team we call Sales Solutions. And we sell sales intelligence products into the sales community. So we sell Sales Navigator, we sell Sales Insights. I love my job. I run a sales team of people selling sales products into the sales community. So we are all things sales. We live and breathe the sales community, the sales industry. And, for the last couple of years, we've been super focused on really figuring out how we create more value for our customers. We've been very focused on, like, how do we create that value? How do we measure it? How do we talk about it? And it's been super inspiring to really see the amount of value we created for our customers and kind of see them expand, see their footprint expand, their customers grow because of it. So it's all, to me, that's all very exciting stuff. And increasingly, we are very focused on the idea that sales and B2B sales can do a much better job of putting buyers first, of really pulling buyers to the center of selling, which, by the way, sounds really obvious to lots of people who aren't in sales. But if you've been around sales, as I have for the better part of 25 years, putting buyers truly first and selling to buyers in a way that they want and need to be sold to is sort of not done in the main in sales for lots of reasons we can get into. But we're now entering a period where it is becoming more and more important to pull buyers to the center of that conversation, sell to buyers in a way that they want to be sold to, that they need to be sold to, and increasingly that they are demanding that they be sold to. And I think that's a fairly sweeping change that is happening across all of B2B selling. So we're super focused on that, both this year and in the coming years.
Well, Jonathan, we are in great company, or you're in great company. We're also in great company. But I describe my sales career in a very similar way, which is like Leonardo DiCaprio's movie Inception. Salespeople selling sales software to other salespeople, and there's nothing better. So you're the only other person I've heard describe it like that. So I know where your passion is.
Very meta, and I love it.
And your career journey has been pretty interesting. You've been at LinkedIn for over a decade in a variety of roles. You started out as country manager, and then now you're leading up this BU, as you talked about. What were some of the interesting roadblocks or just twists and turns in your journey as you got where you are today? And actually, maybe it kind of predates the LinkedIn days.
Yeah, I think if it predates the LinkedIn days, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I love selling, but I never, like a lot of people maybe, I never started out, wanting to be in sales. And I think we often, as salespeople, we often think about that, like who wanted to, like, whose aspiration was it to become a salesperson? And I'm sure there are lots of people like that. It wasn't mine, like, originally. But, I love problem solving and ultimately, I just love delivering solutions. Like I find that very, very gratifying, frankly, whether it's internal or external. And so, that kind of guided me towards sales fairly early on. I also love risk taking, and I love learning. And I think I've tried to build a career with lots of risk taking built into it and lots of learning built into it. So sales wasn't always like a up and to the right path for me. There was a lot of lateral moves. There were down moves. There were kind of loop-de-loops in my career. But for me, it was all about learning. A lot of it was about risk taking. At the same time, I continue to think that sales, especially when I started out, sales had something of a bad rap. And, from the very beginning of my career, I felt that was like a very worthy challenge, that there were great things about sales. Sales was always about helping people. B2B sales or frankly, any kind of sales done well was about helping people solve problems. And I always loved that piece of it and felt that there was a better way to do it. And what I'm so excited about, at LinkedIn, the job I do at LinkedIn is that's what we do every single day. And, I think people at LinkedIn, we come to work because we really both feel and can see that we are helping salespeople and companies become more productive every day, and it's like super gratifying. So that's kind of what's driven me throughout my career, was that desire to learn, that desire to problem solve, and to some extent that desire to take some risks.
I love all of those. On the risk piece, what was one of those risks that you could highlight for the audience that you took?
That's what I was going to ask too. I got to know, what's the big one has to jump to your mind, Jonathan, in your career?
Well, lots of them. I mean, I've worked at small companies. I've worked, for startups initially. Before startups were cool, I worked at startups. And I've done jobs that didn't maybe make a lot of sense on paper. For me anyway, early on, I was an editor. I worked in production, like media production. And I did that all in the knowing that I had an aspiration to lead people and ultimately to, be a sales leader. I felt like these were really interesting and important competencies to acquire along the way. Understanding how products are built, understanding how to create value. I've been in operations roles for a long time, so understanding, how to make businesses great and how to drive efficiency was important to me. So lots of lateral moves. A lot of them looked like risks, and frankly, probably were like short-term risks. But I like to think in the long arc of a career, and the reality is careers are long. We get swayed and we hear of stories of very short careers, but in fact careers are long. And so in the long arc of a career, doing a lot of like really interesting things that excited me and were challenging was more important to me than, again, this sort of up and to the right linear progress through one division or one industry.
So LinkedIn has changed quite a bit during the pandemic. There's been a tremendous increase in remote job postings that we've never seen that before, in this space and beyond. Can you talk a little bit more about how that's affected your business?
I can, although I think that as I thought about this question a little bit, LinkedIn is really a proxy for what's happening in the professional world. And so I think that for me, the more interesting maybe piece of this is, what does it mean for the macro? What does it mean for the professional world or sales as an industry? And, we've clearly been in this time of massive change in the last 18 months. The secular shift to remote work. And for those of us in sales, the secular shift to remote buying and selling has been, super profound. And, we've all kind of lived through this, with varying degrees of success over the last year and a half. But I think we've seen some pretty amazing shifts that have happened quite quickly. And there's clearly this open question about how much of these shifts will remain, will stick around. I know we're all trying to kind of work through those, but we saw things like when we pulled buyers through the recent through COVID and through the recent secular shift to kind of remote buying, and we asked buyers and sellers, like, what's happening in your world and how are you doing? One of the things, the most interesting thing that came back was that buyers are pretty comfortable in a remote world. In fact, buyers, by and large, like working remotely, like working digitally. They're more effective. And that makes sense, right? Like buyers, a large part of their world was, in the physical world was, not part of the buying process. They had to do a lot of meeting people that were inefficient. They had to go around and in person, meet with a lot of people in their buying committees, and there was just a lot of inefficiency in their world, and a lot of that has gone away through digital. So, we're hearing from buyers that they're very comfortable with this sort of digital selling and the shift to remote work. That, of course, will or may have like material consequences for how sales is done, right? If buyers decide that buying is best done digitally, it will become increasingly difficult for sellers to operate in a physical world, whether they want to or not. And so I think there's this big open question really around like, what do buyers think? And what do buyers want to do, going forward? And something like 70% of buyers, at least the ones we surveyed, the 400 odd we surveyed, 70% of them want to keep working 50% of the time, want to work remotely 50% of the time. So that's going to have material consequences just on how selling is done. So if you're a salesperson, almost regardless of how much you like digital selling or remote selling or don't like it, we got to pay attention to our buyers and really start to understand how our buyers like this shift to remote. And maybe we've certainly just overall seen a rise in remote work. I think remote work postings have gone up like 5x on LinkedIn. Now, again, the question is, do those level out or do those kind of retreat back as we go back to work, and back to work physically? So I think that's still kind of very much an open question. And maybe one more thing I think I found pretty interesting over the last 18 months with respect to the data we see on LinkedIn. We saw the job postings for industries that support or partner with sales have also gone up pretty dramatically. So functions like customer success, functions like sales readiness, even functions like sales operations, although slightly less so, have grown massively over the last couple of years. I think both customer success and sales readiness have grown something like 200% over the last couple of years. So those functions are growing extremely quickly, and they really kind of bolster the idea that sales is growing up and sales is becoming well defined and well structured, but also that it can be done digitally. That a lot of the functions that we're building up are functions that support remote selling. So lots going on in sales. Lots of movement in the direction that supports digital selling, and a real open question around buyers and how much buyers want to continue with remote or digital selling.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It seems so obvious now, but even having sold, I never thought of this. As a sales professional, your entire career is in a sales cycle. Buyers spend a very small percentage of their year in an actual buying cycle. Right. And so I think that's really interesting to kind of think of that mindset and think, hey, we have to meet as sellers, we have to meet them where they are when they're there. So that's really interesting.
Well, here's something for salespeople to think about. We polled buyers and we asked them, like, how do you spend your day? And 17% of buyers' time is spent talking to sellers. 17% talking to all sellers, every seller, right? So you're one of that as a seller. You get some sliver of that 17%.
Right.
The majority of their time is spent doing research, online and offline research, which that supports, of course, the idea that buyers do a lot of research and are well prepared. They're 70% of the way down the sales cycle before they talk to a salesperson, so they're doing tons of research to get. That's how they spend their day. And by the way, the other portion of their day is spent talking to their internal champions or the buyer circle, so that literally their day is split into those quadrants, right? And so as a salesperson, you're only getting a small sliver of their time to begin with, and whether that's digital or in person, is very much an open question.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I've seen so many sellers post on LinkedIn of how they're craving to get back in the field and go meet with their customers and their buyers. I don't think I've seen a single post of a buyer saying, I am craving to meet with my sales rep or get back in that buying cycle. So how do we come and meet in the middle and make everybody happy? It's going to be really interesting to see that.
Yeah, it will be. And none of us know. We're just kind of looking at sort of this play out and anticipating. And one of the things we do know, going back to this idea of buyer first, we know that if you only get, if you're getting a small sliver of a buyer's time, of course, it has to be super highly effective, and you have to figure out how to drive value in that time, in that very limited time. And, the trends are changing. Like it's the reason we're moving to this buyer first world is, at the end of the day, because sellers increasingly have to deliver value from the very first interaction. And buyers tell us they have to deliver value from the very first interaction, or you don't get a second chance. And so the days of like being able to do discovery calls and having all this time to like gather data, it doesn't exist anymore. For lots of buyers, if a seller shows up, whether it's in person or digitally, you have to deliver value from the very first interaction in order to get a second interaction or to proceed down the sales cycle. That's what's driving this buyer first phenomenon. Buyers are doing the research. They know a lot. They know everything about your competitor because it's all public. They know all about your product because it's, for the most part, it's all public. They want to know how you add value. They want to know, like, increasingly, how is your company going to advise me, going to consult me, and add value to what I already know about the products.
I'm loving this already, Jonathan, because as you know, we're all about opinions versus reality, and you've dropped at least a handful of stats, which is fantastic. We love that. And I want to go into the kind of buyer first mindset, right? And I saw on LinkedIn that you'd referenced the new State of Sales 2021 report that LinkedIn puts out every year. And it said that, I'm reading from it to make sure I get it right here, 63% of sellers say they always put buyers first, yet only 23% of buyers feel that that's true. So 1 in 3. Why do you think that is?
I think it has to do with the changes I talked about. I think there's a couple of reasons. So this buying and selling process has changed. And if I use myself as a quick analog, when I started selling a long time ago as a B2B salesperson, and I literally knocked on doors. My job was to knock on doors and to wait in waiting rooms. And when I finally got a meeting with somebody, it was really to show them the features and benefits of my product. Right. Well, all that features and benefit stuff is of zero value, right? And sales used to be about essentially asymmetry of information, right? Salespeople had all the information about your product, and you meted it out in sort of dribs and drabs to buyers as you felt sort of had benefit for you as a salesperson. Well, that clearly no longer is the way. It hasn't been for a long time, but buyers can access all this information about features and benefits. So that sort of asymmetry of information has closed. Buyers have all this information now. And so salespeople have to deliver value. They have to add these insights. And I use that word insights because I think increasingly the job of a salesperson is to show how your product portfolio, your suite of services adds value and maybe adds insights or can help your customer achieve their goals in a way that they wouldn't be able to do without your product and services. That's your job. It's not to talk about the product and the services anymore. And so I think this disparity exists because, in lots of cases, sellers aren't there yet. Their organizations, by and large, haven't backed them up. By the way, their organizations haven't helped salespeople get to the place where they have those insights and that value to talk about. And so they're still selling features and benefits, or they're pitching with templates, or they're using stock information, none of which adds value. And so that's the disparity. And in lots of cases, sellers, by the way, know that they're doing that, they're sort of constrained by their organizations. So I think over time we'll see organizations start to change that approach, and then we'll see salespeople start to change that approach. But that's largely kind of how this is playing out right now. But maybe one more thing that I think is actually the real shoe dropping or kind of so what moment is that it's yes, there's this disparity of how buyers and sellers perceive like how much value is being added. But at the end of the day, this is about trust. Like it's increasingly about trust. And increasingly buyers say that trust I think trust ranks sort of like the second highest dimension of the sales process. Buyers put trust above price, right? If you don't like, you can have the greatest price, but if they like trust, they're not going to buy from you. And so the problem with all of this is really the trust gap. And the majority, to be very clear, and I think this was in the State of Sales report as well, 51% of buyers view sellers as untrustworthy. I mean, kind of full stop.
Yeah.
Like,
wow.
No shock why people don't sprint towards sales careers.
People as untrustworthy, right? And trust is important. And so forgetting everything else, we just have to solve that trust gap, right? And the trust gap gets solved by putting buyers first. The trust gap gets solved by, providing solutions to customers, solutions to problems that they have, that they say they have, that are important to them. And so increasingly we have to move in that direction.
And as a salesperson coming in to work with a new client, you're dealing with the experiences that they've had with prior sellers. So maybe that prior man or woman was not trustworthy, or they did something that turned off the client, and now you have to overcome that hurdle. So it's even harder for you.
Yeah, totally. Like part of it, you're right. If you have a brand that has not looked upon, because brand ranks pretty high on dimensions of value. And if you work for a company that has had a bad brand in the past, then yeah, you have to overcome that as well.
So I'd love to hear, Jonathan. I know you made it super clear about the importance of putting buyers first, overcoming this trust gap. What are some of the ways, maybe there's strategies that you use with your team, or maybe just how you coach your sales team to kind of put this into action?
Yeah, actually, just maybe before I do, one more word though. I think just to be really clear, I think there are a set of activities that a lot of salespeople do today. And just to be really clear on what we've heard from buyers on the kinds of things that they consider, I guess I would call them deal killers, but essentially like the things that don't engender trust or don't put buyers first. I mean, it's things like misleading information. Like that's not surprising. That is at the top of the list. But it's things like not understanding the buyer's company. And that sounds obvious, but I mean, we need to go beyond sort of the first level information about a buyer's company. They're talking about like the strategy, like understanding my company strategy. Like sellers should know that going into an interaction. And so the bar is becoming higher for what is considered, deal killing type of behavior on salespeople. Increasingly though, it's things also like cold calling. Like cold calling buyers is increasingly becoming one of the areas that buyers consider deal killers. So I think there's a very explicit, specific list of things that sellers are still doing that buyers consider deal killers. So I just kind of put that out there because I think it's definitely worth calling out for folks that are listening.
For sure. I'd be curious to know if it's the cold call itself, which is an interruption, or if it's the way the cold call is handled, right? So it's the way you're interrupting. I don't know if you have insight into that, Jonathan, or maybe a personal stance.
I mean, increasingly there's a privacy piece to this. One of the things that's happening that we observe is there's this sort of conflating of B2C and B2B. And companies like Amazon and Netflix have done a wonderful job of training us as individuals to expect services in a certain way. And that is porting over to B2B. And so buyers are expecting that same level of personalization. Like buyers increasingly want things personalized. They want it round the clock. And a lot of that's, I think, driven out of like the personal experience, the B2C experience. And in B2C, there's a high bar for privacy. Amazon or Netflix knows who you are and they treat you like an individual. They don't cold call you. And I think that idea of just how sort of invasive cold calling is bleeding into B2B in the same kind of way. People, you only have one phone, and Amazon's on your phone, but so are the people who are calling you for work. And I think if a cold call comes through on your phone, like it's increasingly, whether it's for work or personal, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Netflix is making it hard for B2B sellers because if you think of your behavior and your mindset on Netflix, it's I expect you to have everything that I want when I want it. And sometimes I don't know what I want, but I want something, so tell me what I want,
Mm-hmm.
which is like the recommendation.
Yeah, I think it's a great observation. So, by the way, slightly maybe a slight tangent to this conversation, but I do, I think we will get into a world in B2B selling where, among other things, I think that the recommendations will become increasingly important, like data-driven recommendations. Things like, sellers will start to be known, their reputation will start to be well known and well documented because of your digital footprint, right? Mm-hmm. And I think buyers will increasingly be able to choose sellers and salespeople, right? They'll have a really good idea of who the strongest salespeople are, from their digital footprint, and they'll start to pick and choose. And I think I
Yeah.
think we can expect to see that coming in the next couple of years.
Imagine reps are like, they have Yelp reviews, and you're like, oh, Devin's only 3.2 sales rep. I'm buying Gong. I don't want to deal with him. Scroll. Oh, Sheena, she's 4.9. Great reviews. I'll click her and start the sales process with her specifically.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, pick your own rep.
and if you look at LinkedIn, like a lot of your reputation is known and clear on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and will get more clear over time. Like the great relationships you have, the strong relationships, will become known and will become evident.
So speaking of data, what data do you leverage when working with your team to make sure that they're putting buyers first?
Yeah, it's a great question. The data that we look at is mostly customer data. So you can start from the question is like, are we creating value for? That's the best sort of proxy for, are we acting in a buyer first way? Are we creating value for our customers? And so we have a metric for value that we look at, and we measure all of our customers against this value metric to see how much value they're getting. So one is we look at the value. Two, we look at things that are maybe a little more traditional, like growth, like retention. Retention and growth, especially a certain kind of growth, is a great proxy for value. Right, customers will grow typically when they're getting value. We're starting to look at metrics like quality revenue, like high quality revenue versus low quality revenue. So revenue that comes from growth, revenue comes from customers who are growing. Again, as good proxies. We have some more internal metrics that we look at actual individuals. Like there's a set of behaviors that we expect salespeople increasingly to do, and there are certain ways to measure those. There are certain activities that we ask them to do that help us understand the value that they're creating with a sales model that we built. I think Devin, you'd asked the question about or maybe what we ask our salespeople to do that sort of exhibits buyer first behavior. We've created kind of a sales model or a rubric that we follow. The very quick way to think about it is, because they're all behaviors that I think salespeople are doing differently than they have been in the past. One is we're encouraging all of our salespeople to learn a lot before they go in, and that's different from a discovery call, because this is mostly done digitally. It's mostly done on your own, or at least it's mostly done before you ever talk to a customer. So learning before we do anything is essential. The second one is sharing, and sharing really, really readily. And this shows up in the state of sales as one of the deal killers one of the things that buyers consider buyer first is sellers who share information beyond just the product that they're selling. So those sellers who share competitive information, and again, it's all out there, but salespeople who share competitive information and do it, coming from the sort of a front foot, we consider a really great buyer first activity. So we encourage our salespeople to share beyond just our information, share competitive information. We expect them to solve problems, and so we ask them what problems they're solving. When we look at our accounts and our account reviews, we look at what problems are being solved, and we try to map those to problems that customers want to be solved. And then the last one is the value metric, is how much value we're delivering. So we ask all of our sales reps to go through those, and we have various ways to measure each of them. I think we do all those things, by the way. That's how we think about building trust. We think if we get, through a sales motion, if we can do all those activities, if we can learn and share and problem solve and deliver value, we'll build trust.
I love the first thing that you mentioned, which was like that value metric that you track for each client. Are you able to elaborate at all on that, or is it something that's proprietary?
I can tell you it's, we sell a software product, we sell a SaaS software product. So it's largely an engagement metric that we know that if customers engage with the product certain ways, they'll get a lot of value out of it. So we look at that engagement metric as a proxy for value. And I think lots of companies can do a version of this.
Yeah, I find that interesting. I liked all of it too. I was admittedly spot checking you, Jonathan. You're like, hey, buyer first, here's the 5 things we do. Everything was mutual with the buyer. It wasn't like 20 calls a day or, working 9 to 5 specific hours. Everything was like, okay, there's like what is the reciprocation of that, right? Which is something I talk about a lot. Like sales activity is something a sales rep does that's outbound. Sales engagement's when it's reciprocated, right? And that's what really matters. And I like that all 5 points were very much focused on that latter part. Last question for you before we get to the last question. Are there any pieces of data that you leverage that some sales leaders might be surprised to hear?
I do a lot of qualitative sort of data. So we're a very data-driven company, and we have really great sort of quantitative data, and we use all of that. But I think the piece that rounds it out is the qualitative data. And so I do a lot of what maybe we consider LinkedIn sort of dot connecting, is checking in for signals that maybe don't come from sales or come from other parts of the business that may be meaningful. I do a lot of just voice of customer, not so much spot checks, but just talking to customers, and not necessarily about a certain subject, but really listening for what they're focused on and what they're working on. But maybe the one thing that we found really effective last year was we did a lot of customer roundtables, and they were slightly unstructured customer roundtables where we didn't come in as the expert, we came in as the facilitator. And I found those were just the most robust conversations. And, they weren't about LinkedIn, and they weren't certainly about our sales team, but they were about sentiment, and they were about mood. And I think broadly, actually, and maybe most importantly, they were about helping each other. This was about a group of peers who were there to help each other through this. And I think in that respect, they were incredibly helpful to everybody and to me. So we were doing probably one of those a week, or one every couple of weeks for the last year.
I love that approach, because I think it's easy to go, hey, let's get all these people that like us, their clients, or people we want to like us. Let's get them in a room and let's tell them what to talk about, which is the thing, selfishly we want them to be aware of. But when you, like you said, I think a semi-structured structure actually works best, right? You're going to get the real voice of the customer, the things that are actually on their mind. And that's what can guide you and give you more insight than necessarily, hey, here's this narrative we have. Why don't you all talk about it in a forced manner for an hour?
Yeah, and I really hope we don't lose that. And we're going to try not to. But I think these are the kinds of things we learned last year that I think have long-term benefit. That we should keep on doing these in this kind of way. We're going to try to keep continuing to do that.
All right, we are at the tail end of the episode. So Jonathan, we're going to ask you the same question we ask all of our amazing sales leaders that join us on Reveal, which is, how would you describe sales in one word?
Well, you won't be surprised at this point, I don't think, to hear me say the one word I use to describe sales is value. Mm-hmm. That the one thing I encourage all of our salespeople to do, whether you're new or been here forever, regardless of what our priority is that year or what the product is or whatever else, is every single interaction you have with a customer or a stakeholder or someone in the buyer circle, every single one, consider what value you're delivering in that interaction. That's it. And just go into that interaction and understand, you have 30 seconds or 30 minutes, what's the value you're going to deliver? It's this scarce, precious use of time, this scarce resource. If you don't remember anything else, just remember, what is the value you want to get across in that time? Make that interaction a great use of time for the buyer or the person across the table. Every interaction matters, so I'm going to go with value.
That's such a great gut check. And, as you're putting together your agenda for any meeting that you have, make sure that's part of your list as you're thinking through what you're going to talk about. I love that. Well, Jonathan, it was such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thanks so much for joining us. We had a blast, and we hope you did too.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great talking to you both. Hope to catch up soon.
Thanks, Jonathan.